Mother, father, what's afoot? Only possum black as soot. Mother, father, where to tread? Far from possum and his head. Here's a bag, now what's inside? Does he seek or does he hide? Can you spy him deep within? Little possum, black as sin.
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and men flopping around in the mud. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Possum. This 2018 psychological horror from Britain follows a disgraced puppeteer who returns to his childhood home with his bizarre puppet named Possum. As a looming dread closes in on him, Philip must confront the trauma he has suffered in this place. Possum was written and directed by Matthew Holness, an author, actor, and comedian in his feature film debut. Most of the television and shorts that he's worked on have been comedic, but Holness has always had a love for horror as well. The film is actually based on a short story of the same name that Holness wrote, which was based on Freud's theory of the uncanny. When developing the story into a feature-length film, he looked to the silent horror films of the 20s and 30s, limiting the dialogue in exchange for atmosphere and unsettling body horror. Possum is pretty much a two-man show starring Sean Harris from Prometheus, The King, and The Stranger as puppeteer Philip, and Alan Armstrong from Krull, Sleepy Hollow, and Van Helsing as Philip's abusive uncle Morris. Cinematography was handled by Kit Fraser of Under the Shadow, Eternal Beauty, and Shadow in the Cloud, and the score was composed by the Radiophonic Workshop, a BBC sound studio that helped pioneer electronic music in the 50s and 60s, with programs like Doctor Who and Quatermass and The Pit. Philip's fucked up puppet was based on Holness's own fear of spiders, and it was designed by Adam Johansson and Damian Martin of Odd Studio. It was a relatively simple hand puppet, but with 8 legs it required quite a few puppeteers to operate it. The film's beautifully horrifying settings were primarily filmed in Norfolk, including a maybe haunted marsh. Possum had a pretty good festival run and had a couple small theatrical releases, bringing in around $33,000. That isn't much compared to its $850,000 budget, but I have a feeling it's made its money back through home media and streaming. Either way, it was met positively by critics though, who loved Harris's performance, the film's atmosphere, score, and unsettling imagery. There were some who found it a bit too weird or a bit too depressing though. It currently has a 90 and 53% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it has been a bit divisive among general audiences. I, for one, really appreciate Possum. I stumbled across it a couple years ago and had a great time with it. Well, great time with it's kind of a weird way to phrase it given the content of the movie, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you to my patron Minnie Wise for requesting it for me to review. I'm very curious to see how this atmospheric nightmare experience translates into my silly banter. I must give y'all a warning though, this is a very depressing and dark movie. There will be themes of sexual violence discussed throughout the review, so please be mindful before going in. But with all of that said, it's probably time we get started. Go grab some balloons, cause we're watching Possum. The movie opens with a nursery rhyme that Philip wrote about Possum, the terrifying puppet he has made. Mother, father, what's afoot? Only possum, black as soot. Mother, father, where to tread? Far from possum and his head. Here's a bag, now what's inside? Does he seek or does he hide? Can you spy him deep within? Little possum, black as sin. Philip opens up his leather bag, but we only get a glimpse of Possum, who is seemingly alive. Some bizarre opening credits, including film distortion and animation, leads us to Philip and Possum going on a lovely train ride. He notices a boy drawing and asks him about it, but the little lad isn't too keen on talking with a suspicious man. Philip has just returned to his childhood home in Norfolk, which is partially boarded up and covered in smoke damage from a fire that took place during his childhood. He looks over his old diary and hides it back beneath the floor, but when he comes back downstairs, Possum has been moved to the kitchen. Philip takes the long-legged puppet and tosses him into a burn barrel, and he notices a fox watching him as he does so. He heads back inside without lighting Possum ablaze. Time for more nursery rhymes. Bag is open, growing wider. What's inside, man or spider? Little boy, don't lose your way. Possum wants to come and play. Philip wakes from his beauty sleep to find he had a cuddle buddy, and as he takes the puppet back downstairs, he stops at a door. His Uncle Morris emerges from the kitchen to ask if he's going in there, but Philip decides not to. Morris compliments Possum's legs and asks if it has a mind of its own. Philip says he is destroying the puppet, which Morris is disappointed to hear. The uncle has gotten word of why Philip has returned home, and from the sound of it, Philip terrorized some children with his horrifying creation and got fired. Morris asks for a demonstration of how it works before he kills it, but Philip heads out to have a ciggy on the local playground. Believe it or not, but something about Phil and his possum seemed to scare everyone else away. He heads through some woods to a marsh, which also seems to be a location in Philip's story. Look at Possum, there he lies, children meet his lifeless eyes. See his nasty legs and tongue, when he wakes, watch him run. Out in the marsh, Philip hears someone call his name and flees. He returns home to ask Morris if he can borrow his tools, who tells his nephew he's having a fox for dinner. Morris pulls out a puppet he made as a boy, so he's presumably the one who taught Philip the art of puppetry. A maybe real, maybe not real TV shares with Philip that a local 14-year-old boy has gone missing near the marsh, so our puppeteer may not be on the up and up. Some guys recognize Philip and call him a pervert, but they take a good look at him and decide to keep it moving. Now Philip is reminiscing about his school days, which gets the unhappy attention of the principal. He returns to the woods and looks over a particularly creepy section, which turns out to be that creepy spider-looking tree from the intro. He opens up Possum's bag, but once again hears someone call his name and flees. He heads out into the very cool marshlands and drops Possum into a channel. Shit, Philip's been shot. Just kidding, he's just having a little mental breaky in the mud. He comes to his senses, relatively speaking, and fails to find Possum where he just left him. Oh, there he is! Time for more rhymes. Wait a while, my little child, for what is playing dead? Possum with his black balloons will eat you up in bed. We're treated to a minute of very creepy imagery, including black balloons, Philip running around in the woods and marsh, and Possum watching him from the inside. Philip wakes next to his unwanted bestie, but before they can leave, they're beckoned by Morris and his lil puppet. He offers Philip a treat from his candy jar, but his nephew declines. He asks Philip to tell him about the fox again, which is actually a story from Philip's childhood. He and some friends were exploring the marshes when they came across an injured fox, and all of the boys except for him proceeded to kick it around like a ball. They impaled it with sticks until it slowly died, and when he refused to pick it up, they forced him down. They pushed his head into the fox's torn open belly, eventually leaving him in the marsh crying. Eventually the fox opened its eyes though, and simply got up and walked away. Morris laughs before Philip reminds him that this is his house, but the uncle seems to quote a passage from Philip's diary to send him away. Nope, not visiting the scary room yet. He does visit some old barracks, which Morris told him were getting ready to be torn down. Inside, he finds a small mattress and a hat. Outside, he lets Possum get some fresh air. The two have a long stare down before Philip tosses him away, and the puppeteer punches, stomps, and sinks his creation into a canal. He returns home to find that the missing boy, Michael, is the one he took interest in on the train. Uh-oh. That night, he hears Morris reading the Possum nursery rhyme from his diary. He follows the sound downstairs and takes back his diary, and Morris compliments his drawing skills. He asks Philip if he's killed Possum yet, adding that the trains are down so he'll have to stay in town whether he likes it or not. He also warns that people have been talking about him in relation to the missing boy. Philip asks why he didn't burn in the fire instead of his parents, but Morris just laughs as Philip heads to bed. The trains do seem to be down the next day, and Philip finds a picture of his parents as he thinks back to the enclosed room. He passes by a dead fox on a walk, but of course it is just playing Possum. He returns home to find that fucking puppet is back as well, and we get more of Philip's childhood tale. Happy Valley, painted black, all the children in a sack. Wave goodbye to sun and moon, say hello to black balloon. Philip finds Morris burning the newspapers and joins him, and the two even share a ciggy. Things are going nicely until Morris recalls that a boy from Philip's school went missing after the fire. Philip puts Possum into the barrel and pushes him into the flames, and Morris recalls that the kidnapper from Philip's childhood wore a mask so he wouldn't be recognized. Then he gives Philip a candy. That night, Philip has more nightmares of Possum, balloons, billows of smoke, and the enclosed room. He plops another candy into his mouth before Possum emerges from his bag, and the creepy fucker lunges at Philip before he wakes. He hears a knock on the front door and finds police scoping out the house, but they leave before he can decide what to do. The next morning, that sus TV warns Philip that his activities have caught police interest, as a man matching his description was seen near the marsh with a boy matching Michael's description. Uh-oh. As any smart suspect would do, Philip returns to the various locations he has visited. He doesn't find Michael, but he does have to hide from the po-po a few times. He also searches Morris's burn barrel, but the uncle pulls him aside to talk. He tells Philip that cops came around looking for him, but he told them he was out. He tells Philip to lay low, also sharing that he'll be leaving town for a few days. Philip returns to his childhood school in the hopes of talking with his old teacher Mr. Grant, as he apparently knows something about the missing boy from his childhood. Something tells Phil the vibes are off though, and he runs away. He's looking at his parents' photo when it starts raining black sludge, and Philip once again passes out in the marsh. Back at the scary tree, he releases Possum, who follows him through the woods and the barracks. He finds Possum outside and kneels before him, who comes in close to give Philip a big hug. The puppeteer wakes with a candy in his mouth. Now we're given an addition to Philip's story read by Morris. The parcel opened, out it sprang, the black long-legged possum man. Children run, he'll eat and smother, any child without a mother. Philip returns home in a confused rage as he's beginning to see himself as Possum. He finally works up the courage to enter the enclosed room, which seems to be the bedroom his parents died in. There is very suspicious bedding on the floor along with jars of teeth. A masked man suddenly rushes out of the darkness and smothers Philip with a leather duffel bag, who reveals himself to be Morris. He mocks and berates Philip for missing his parents before making it very clear that he molested Philip after their deaths. He asks his nephew if he missed his fingers and shoves them into Philip's mouth as punishment for leaving home. He removes Philip's belt to spank him, but only after confirming that he was the masked man who raped him in the barracks as a boy. He makes Philip admit that he knew all along, laughing that he will take the blame for his crimes. He begins lashing Philip, but when he notices a chest shaking from the inside, he finally starts to fight back. He manages to pin down Morris and snaps his fucking neck. Philip opens the chest to find Michael inside, who immediately gets the fuck out of there. The movie ends with Philip sitting outside, presumably waiting for the cops to come, as he holds Possum's severed head and stares blankly forward. And that's Possum. Man, this is such a depressing and uncomfortable film. You seriously feel dirty after watching it, but I totally mean that to the film's credit. It is very successful at engrossing you in this fucked up world. Compared to a more typical horror film, some may find this to be a bit slow and uneventful, which wouldn't really be inaccurate. Possum is way more about building a dreadful, palpable atmosphere and mood than it is about explaining the ABCs of what happened to Philip. It takes a lot of cues from German expressionist films like Metropolis, Nosferatu, and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and it just revels in the lighting, sound, and bizarre settings. Being shot on 35mm film also gives the film an aged yet timeless feel. It's an unorthodox film for sure, but if you've enjoyed anything along the lines of Stalker, Possession, Eraserhead, Antichrist, A Dark Song, Caveat, Gummo, Mulholland Drive, Under the Skin, or Skinamarink, I think you'll appreciate Possum. If you don't like those films, stay far the fuck away. It can be a little hard to follow, so just to recap what actually happened in the film. Philip was a boy when his mother and father perished in a fire, seemingly on or around his birthday. The house, balloons, and Philip himself were covered in black soot caused by the flames. Morris lived in the house as well and survived the fire, but seemingly never bothered to repair any of the damage. He took great pleasure in shaming, beating, and molesting his nephew, giving him candy after the worst of it. He also murdered at least one other boy while Philip was living there, which is where the leather duffel bag enters the story. It's what Morris used to dispose of the bodies. Morris also seemed to teach Philip the art of puppetry, which he'd grow into doing professionally. But in order to deal with the humongous weight of his trauma, Philip began creating stories to disassociate himself from the reality of his situation. Possum the puppet is basically a manifestation of that trauma trying to creep back into Philip's mind. Despite multiple efforts to throw it away or destroy it, it simply kept finding its way back to him. The name alludes to the act of playing possum, presumably due to Philip more or less playing dead as Morris's horrible acts were happening. This is where the fox symbolism comes from as well, where Philip is the abused creature playing dead, maybe even dying, but coming back to life as a shell of itself. The spider's long legs are representations of Morris's fingers, hoping to wrap around him again. Philip has been so damaged that he can no longer tell the truth from the lies, the reality from the hallucination. Due to this, Philip is a very unreliable narrator. We are seeing the world through his eyes, or more accurately through his traumatized imagination. It could be argued that Morris and Michael were hallucinations along with all of the puppet shit, and all of this was in his head. I don't think that's the case, but there's definitely an argument for it. Or perhaps it was Philip who kidnapped Michael and he reinvented Morris to unsee himself as the predator he became. Again, I don't think that's the case, but it's certainly open for interpretation. But either way, I have to commend Sean Harris for his performance as Philip. It ranges from being melancholic, miserable, and downright terrifying. There isn't a single moment of joy seeping through. Much like the black balloons in his nursery rhyme, Philip has been completely consumed by misery. All in all though, I think Possum is a really great film. I don't come back to it very often because of just how damn bleak it is, but it is that bleakness that makes me appreciate it so much. It's a horrifying case study on shame, grief, and trauma. The performances are fantastic, the cinematography is gorgeous, the sound design is engrossing, the settings isolate us in alienating landscapes and filthy interiors, the puppet is fucking nightmare fuel, but it is only a mask for the human horrors this film explores. It certainly isn't a film for everyone, but if you can sit back and immerse yourself, I think you'll find it's worthwhile. Thank you again to my patron Minnie for requesting Possum for me to review. It was really nice to revisit this one. Well, that's about it. What did you think of Possum? Let me know down in the comments. And join me in 2 weeks as we check out Friday the 13th, the so-called final chapter. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Possum. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks, y'all.